nonsensical.
I call Dr. Russell Norman.
I rise to speak on behalf of the Green Party on the Taxation, International Investment and Remedial Matters Bill. The Green Party is supporting this bill, but we do have concerns about it. And I want to talk about some of the issues around the bill. I'd just like to endorse the comments of David Parker. I thought Mr Parker made some very good contributions here, and David Clark, and I think it's an important debate. The thing that I wanted to focus on firstly was the way that the way that we think about the tax treatment of companies in investment decisions. There's a very simplistic, almost ideological view which says that companies make investment decisions based on differential tax rates, or tax rates have a huge impact on investment decisions. Now, whether that's incoming investment or other kinds of investment decisions. Now, there's no question that taxes do have an impact on investment decisions. The question is, how significant is it? And what was interesting about the IRD briefing, or I guess the IR briefing as it is now, to the Finance and Expenditure Committee, was that the lowering of the company tax rate in New Zealand appeared to have very little impact in terms of incoming investment into New Zealand. Part of the rationale for lowering the company tax rate was in order to attract a greater level of foreign investment into New Zealand. So the argument was, globalisation means we're competing with others, so our tax rates need to be the same or lower than other jurisdictions in order to attract investment. Now, I'm sure that differential tax rates are a factor. I mean, I don't think anyone can deny it is a factor, but to put so much emphasis just on differential company tax rates, I think is a mistake. So one of the underlying principles behind this bill actually suggests that it is a very, very important issue. And I would argue it is an issue, and the reason we're supporting it is because giving some support to New Zealand companies that are investing overseas and affecting some of the implications of the tax system on them is important. But I do think we need to think again about how important differential tax rates are in investment decisions. There are a huge range of other factors that influence the decisions, the investment decisions of internationally mobile companies. And the tax treatment and the company tax rates is just one of it. And I think if we don't put attention on those other factors, which are much, much larger, then we can focus our attention on the small stuff rather than the big stuff. And that's the second issue I wanted to raise in relation to this bill. And it really is a principle that's running through a lot of the government reform agenda, which is a focus on microeconomic reform. Now, microeconomic reform is important. So the government talks, for example, relentlessly about removing red tape. Some of the changes in this bill could be characterised, I think, as microeconomic reform. And we know that microeconomic reform is important. There's no question that it's important. But how important are microeconomic reform changes, such as small changes in regulation, or the burden of regulation as it's called, small changes in tax rates? How important is that to the overall performance of an economy? And I think that question is the government doesn't really consider that question. When you look at, for example, our largest exporting company, Fonterra, we didn't build Fonterra through a process of microeconomic reform. Fonterra came about through state intervention, through government intervention, to build a company that is internationally competitive. Those people who believe that the market always delivers and that microeconomic reform to remove regulation results automatically in a well-performing economy don't pay attention to the way that real companies and real competitive commercial entities develop and become a size where they can actually compete internationally. Fonterra didn't happen by accident. It didn't happen because the state took a hands-off approach. And microeconomic reform by itself will not deliver the kind of internationally competitive companies like Fonterra that New Zealand needs. So I think that there is a fundamental misconception which kind of goes through the government's approach to bills like this and tax policy in general, but more generally in their economic strategy, where they believe that microeconomic reform by itself will solve the problem and that the New Zealand economy will suddenly perform really well if we just introduce a series of basically new right microeconomic reform measures. It doesn't work. It hasn't worked anywhere. When you look at economic development strategies, that isn't going to do it. And the changes in this bill, most of them are fine changes with the exception of those that are identified by David Parker. But by themselves, they do not make an economic strategy that will result in a well-performing New Zealand economy. We actually do need to think larger. Now, the government has identified some areas, of course, casinos, where they want to give special treatment, but actually the focus on microeconomic reform is the overwhelming focus of the government, and I think that's a bit of a mistake. The third issue I wanted to touch on in this bill was the treatment of incoming and outgoing investment. Because what this bill is basically tries to make it easier for outgoing investment of New Zealand companies when they're going somewhere else. They're not effectively double taxed, and so the companies they're competing with are facing a level tax field. This is clearly an important issue, and no question about it, and for that reason we're supporting it. And what sits behind it is the effect of globalisation. So globalisation means that there are these internationally mobile companies, and governments, democratically elected governments, find themselves in the invidious situation where they are actually having to look at should they be lowering taxes in a bit of a race to the bottom in order to facilitate both incoming investment and the investment overseas of their companies, which is what this bill is responding to, is that global competition around tax rates. The thing about that if you like, conception of the problem is that what's happening internationally at the moment is that governments are not in a race to the bottom anymore around tax rates. And because of the fiscal pressures on governments all around the planet, at the moment, actually many governments are increasing tax rates. They're increasing tax rates because of the fiscal pressures on government budgets. And this government doesn't seem to quite understand what's happening internationally. And when you look at the changes, the effect of the changes in the 2010 tax changes, which were very fiscally negative, you can see that the government doesn't quite understand the international context of what's going on in terms of tax rates. The second issue is around how to treat incoming foreign investment. And I think this is obviously a very hot issue in New Zealand. And the basic principle behind the bill is that there should be a level playing field between the treatment of incoming and outgoing foreign investment. Now, the question is that in New Zealand's interest to have that philosophical approach to treat them the same? Because we know that some incoming foreign investment, when it brings new jobs, new businesses, when it brings new technology, perhaps new networks, adds something to the New Zealand economy. We know that other incoming foreign investment, when it buys up pre-existing businesses, particularly businesses that are operating in the oligopolistic sectors of the economy, such as telecommunications or banking, doesn't necessarily add a lot to the New Zealand economy. So we need, I believe, in terms of an economic strategy, to differentiate between different kinds of incoming foreign investment. We shouldn't simply have a level, say, all incoming foreign investment is good. Some of it adds something and some of it doesn't. And I think that we need to use whatever levers we have to actually facilitate the incoming foreign investment that adds something to the New Zealand economy. But it doesn't necessarily add something to the economy if we simply allow the buy-up of pre-existing businesses that are simply earning monopoly or oligopolistic profits, such as in some of the very mature sectors of the New Zealand economy with relatively low competition. Because the effect of doing that, of course, is that once those investments come in, so for example in the banking sector, that the profits and dividends that come out of that sector simply flow overseas and add to the pressure on our current account deficit. So I think we need to be more differentiating in the way that we treat incoming foreign investment than is the principle that underpins this bill, which is to basically be non-differentiating, to have a level playing field between ingoing and outgoing. Nonetheless, there are some positive changes in this bill. They're small, they'll make a minor difference. There is some cost to the tax base, and some of it's a completely unnecessary cost to the tax base, but it's a relatively minor cost to the tax base, and so we'll be supporting it, this bill. But I do think that the government needs to rethink their approach to how they treat differentiating in terms of incoming foreign investment. I think they need to think again about relying completely on microeconomic reform in terms of an economic development strategy. And I think that we need to think again about why it is that companies make investment decisions and not simply rely on company tax rates and think that somehow that's the solution to the issue we face in the New Zealand economy, which is we need to build competitive businesses based in New Zealand using our global advantages so that they can compete in a global market. And of course some of those are around clean jobs in the clean tech sector, but I won't get into those, Mr. Speaker, because that's a long way from this bill. So on behalf of the Greens, we will be supporting this bill. Thank you.
I call Paul Goldsmith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're pleased to speak in favour